Hey everyone, it's Amanda and Derek. Welcome back to our latest episode of No Cookies for You. Thank you very much for joining us. Today we're going to deep dive into a very fun privacy initiative, privacy risk assessments.
Let's dive in on privacy assessments. I mean, there's so many privacy assessments out there, but what do you think some of the challenges are around privacy, getting people to do privacy assessments? Like that is, I think, what I've heard in my network is that people don't fill out the privacy assessments. What do you think that is?
I think people just don't understand like what it is that like a privacy team is trying to do, um, and just being kind of knowledgeable about like what is the purpose of a privacy assessment. um, and again, like, it's no fault to them, right? But sometimes I find that people have no clue when it comes to personal information or sensitive personal information. um, so I find that's one of the challenges. And um, something else too, right, is that folks feel like if extra work is put on them and it's not geared towards their role, right, in organization, I think there's always maybe a little bit of pushback there. Um, and that's just kind of my 2 cents on it. I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, but would love to hear what you have to say.
I think that the extra work is certainly a factor. Um, but I think that sometimes privacy teams can make it more complicated than it needs to be. You really don't need that much information initially to determine if they need a full PIA, right? So, um, yeah, I think they make it too complicated, and then people find ways to circumvent it and or not conveniently not remember the process or say they didn't know the process even though it's in like process guides. So I think it's creating that privacy culture, but also making it easy and really getting to what are the questions that you need to ask in order to suss out if they need a full privacy impact assessment or if this light privacy assessment is enough.
Oh yeah. People like, they'll get sneaky, right? You call that like tricking the system. Um, so I've seen like a couple approaches to that. I think like making it easy, right, is like the number one thing.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
seen people like ask questions in a way that like may contradict something that they answered earlier. Um, yeah, so I've seen that approach um,
No, we're
before,
not
but
sharing any information with another system. Oh, but we've identified a system where it's going. I was like, what? You're so inconsistent.
yeah, here's my schema, and it has like sensitive PI, like credit card, you know, username, email, password, type stuff. But we talk about challenges in making things easier. I know you and I talked about this concept of better tripwires, and would love to get a little bit more insight on like what is that, right? If I was brand new to privacy and building the program and building a privacy assessment, could you shed some light on that?
Yeah. So when I think of tripwires, so what is the natural process that people have to go through to build do build something or to deploy a project? And usually there's some project management software, right? So or where they have all the requirements in there. Wouldn't it be neat if you could put a tripwire and have it send from, let's take pretend Jira line is what people are using or Jira or whatever that is common requirements tools. But wouldn't it be nice if you could send that to your privacy management platform, send that basic information, and then that would automatically open an assessment for them that they would have to create as part of the project. So I think it's really privacy by design. That's what privacy by design is, right? But I think it's meeting people where they are and not disrupting their BAU too much, especially if you're trying to, build this privacy program and no one really knows what privacy is, like you can go on a road show. But I think meeting them where they are in their regular day-to-day job seems to be um, a good approach. It has worked relatively well for me in my experience. I don't know, what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think embedding it, easily into, business as usual processes. And, I think about it like on the privacy side, like it's the beginning of the three lines of defense um, there. So I think making it easy, making it a light tripwire in the beginning. And I talk a lot about threshold assessments and there's different terms for like express PIA. I think I've heard some other ones before, but can't think of them off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, right. And then making it easy for the end user before really diving into if, hey, there's personal information involved, like now let's trigger that second line of defense. Does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, let's talk about like the questions. The bare minimum that you need to know for a project is obviously the project name, a description. That's always nice, right? So then if they answer yes or no to subsequent questions, at least you have a description and that's something you can ask questions on and be like, tell me more about this, right? Um, does it does the project involve the collection, use, storage of personal information or sensitive personal information processing? And then I think that's it. Am I missing anything? I mean, what more really do you need to know um, to gauge whether or not they need a full PIA? Because if there's no privacy impact, then everyone can move on with their lives, I think.
Yeah, like I totally agree with that, right? And making it like yes, no type questions, and having the description there, and then based on how they answer everything, right? Either trigger like that full PIA or DPIA, and then if something seems odd, right, maybe in the description, right, that's when you kind of powwow, set up a conference call, and get a little bit of deeper insight there. But if you can do like maybe 5 questions, right, and have a good piece of software to keep track of that, um, I feel like that's all you need is like a good first line of defense, especially if you're like starting a privacy program and
Right.
folks may not have a good understanding of what are these people trying to do. Privacy team,
Right.
like, um,
And there's no point in making them fill out a whole assessment if there really isn't personal information or sensitive personal information involved. But if they say no, if they say no to both, I like asking for you better bring receipts. You better show me your solution intent. Because there have been a few times where people have said no and tried to game the system. Oh, that means I won't have to do a whole privacy impact assessment if I say no to these questions. Well, bring the receipts, my friends. So I think that is a question that is really helpful in keeping people honest. And sometimes people don't have bad intentions. They really don't understand that IP address is personal information, right? So I give people some grace. But if they say no, and then I find first name, last name, email address in there, I'm like, you were trying to game the system.
Definitely. Yeah, like vision like my grandma or mom, like, filling it out, like, they're probably not going to know. Right.
Right.
Cool. Um, so let's say that like personal information is involved and you fill out a full PIA, right, is triggered. But what are some good questions that you like to get from that full PIA?
I like to start building my data map. So I like to know which systems it's going, you know, sending information to, which vendors it's sending information to, where it's coming from. So I like to know the source and really building out that data map. Um, I find that's probably, if you do it up front, that's way easier than trying to, clean up. So that that's what I would say is really like building out that data map um, is important when someone is filling out a full PAA.
Yeah,
How
totally
about you?
agree. Oh, yeah, totally agree, Amanda. And um, kind of a question that like comes up a lot is like project and processing activity and like, how do you kind of build things in a way to like to capture that? Right. And I know you and I have, discussed in the past like some good strategies about having a project and then relating it to say a master processing activity. So I don't know if I'm getting way off on a tangent here, but I like to think of you have a good common sense, or excuse me, a good list of your processing activities.
Right.
And then you may have a project that is a part of that processing activity, right? So I think of a website, user authentication, right? So you
Hmm.
may have like a buy flow, right? That could be a processing
Hmm.
activity, and you have a website and you need some kind of user authentication, right? So I
Right.
consider that as like a project that is like a child to that
Right.
processing activity. So we always have unique kind of conversations around that. And I think something I've noticed, especially recently, is like the maturity of privacy program processes and seeing that a lot more. Whereas in the beginning, it was just like, hey, we need an assessment, we need a record or something. Like, here's just a piece of paper, right? And
Yeah.
now a lot of companies are getting more strategic, especially when it starts coming to like building those relationships and um, just some food for thought there. I
Yeah, I
love like
really think spending time on those processing activities and is really important when you're starting out because you want to have defined list of processing activities rather than every initiative becomes a processing activity because you had no structure. You were moving fast and didn't have any structures standing it up, and then you have to do a bunch of cleanup a year down the road because you're like, oh, this doesn't make any sense. We have 1,000 processing activities. Um, and that I don't think any company has 1,000 processing activities. They probably have 20 things that they market, they communicate to customers. But if every project is a processing activity, it gets messy very fast. So I think time spent would be defining those processing activities, and it'll just make your life easier down the road.
yeah, totally agree with you. And um, you know what? Maybe I don't even know the answer to this, right? Um, is like, I mean, do you think at some point a project could become like its
Sure.
standalone like processing activity?
I think that's possible. Like maybe you were not in the business of um I don't know. Maybe you are standing up a whole new work stream and a whole new like subline of business that creates new it's creates new processing activities, but there is an initial project that is to market to customers. Maybe you never marketed to customers before and it was just word of mouth. And now you are marketing to customers. So you create a new processing activity because it's a new thing for it. But that project, I think, is reasonable. Yeah, we want to market to customers. Okay. So that's, yeah, I can see certain situations. It probably isn't super often. Um, but I think it definitely can happen.
Cool. Yeah, I love that explanation. Um, Something that just came to mind too is like we make the threshold like really simple. Do we want to do the same thing for the PIA? Like, do you think it's region based, US versus GDPR? I mean, what do you think?
I think, of course, I mean, every jurisdiction kind of has their own spin on things. So Europe cares about things that, like consent, for example, they want you to get consent for everything. As for the US, we have a different flavor of consent where it's an opt-out model, right?
Mhm.
So I think that definitely jurisdictionally, like you may have to tweak your assessment or word it more broadly so that it can cover both use cases. Um, but there's only so much you can pare down the PIA, especially with AI coming into the fold. How do you think AI is shaping the way we assess projects now? Um,
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think of the Venn diagram of privacy and security, and you just add that new circle
mhm,
for AI. And I know this is something you and I talked about, and just obviously everybody's kind of talking about it.
right,
Um, so I think starting to ask those questions in the PIA, maybe even in the PTA as well, to try and catch it early. Um, because I mean, every single business is either has AI or they're playing around with it.
right.
Um, does that answer your question or?
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of double click on what you said, I think it's even more important to truly understand if you're going to do a light PIA, it's really important to truly understand how the project is going to work. Are they using artificial intelligence or machine learning to build a thing? Granted, no, there's no personal information or sensitive personal information involved, but are they building a thing that I always use the like pre-employment test, right? So I'm an applicant for a job. I fill out this pre-employment aptitude test and it generates a score. Um, if someone is building a model that will tell them to hire me or not based on that score, even though my name's not associated with it, um, that intention could trigger profiling, right? It could trigger privacy laws because the intention of that model is to make hiring decisions objective, right? And so I think we have to be super careful, especially when it comes to AI, and really understand what the business or IT is trying to do and what their plan is. Um, because that's the part that scares me with like the light PIAs is it could be no personal information. The schema could be clean, but the intention is wacko. And yeah, I get scared. So I really try to understand the projects.
Yeah, totally agree. And like, the thing you brought up about AI doing like the aptitude test, and I just envision like hey, this model does the test, and then here's another model that makes a decision about hiring you, and like these two models talk to each other, and it starts building like the inferences and profiling about you, and could be totally off.
Right.
Um, I was talking with a friend the other day about like, let's say that on my laptop, right, I leave it at my house, right, and my daughter starts looking at stuff, excuse me, online, and it may be kids things, and if that information like got into a model, God forbid, right, they may be
Mhm.
like, this 40-year-old man is looking at kids stuff, like he might
Weirdo. Weirdo.
fit. Yeah. So it's very interesting, and it probably is like a good thing to catch early through an assessment, because yeah, major impacts on privacy, and then I think of the Soloff taxonomy. Um, I can't remember the category, but it's like it has an inference about you, or it's like making stuff
Hmm.
up that might not be true. I um, can't remember the name of it, but does that make sense?
Yeah, for sure. Uh, and I don't know, some people, there are mixed opinions in the industry as to whether or not inferences are personal information. I I had talked to a friend about this, and he works at one of the big four, and he's like, what they're seeing is if you're acting on inferences, then it's considered personal information. So if you're serving someone an ad, it's considered like personal information because you're acting on it as if it were true. Um, so it's just there's interesting takes in the industry, even about our inferences, personal information, or are they just arbitrary data points that may or may not be true. So yeah, we could have a whole episode on just inferential data and go down the rabbit hole with that.
Oh yeah. Um, I know we do like cookie reviews on these podcasts as well, and today I got those Keebler fudge stripes. These guys here, and absolutely love these things. Since I was a kid, I put them in the freezer as well, uh, just like I did the Oreos. But what do you have for us today, Amanda?
I have another healthy, semi-healthy choice. Lenny and Larry's, for those of you that are watching this on YouTube. Um, Lenny and Larry's plant-based protein cookies. They're called complete cremes. Essentially, it's an Oreo. I don't know if it's any good, but it has 15 grams of protein. And oh, I thought the whole pack was 130 calories. It turns out that only two cookies are 130 calories. So I may need to eat this in a couple of sessions because it seems reasonable when you pick it up, but mm, maybe not.
Oh, it looks just like an Oreo. You weren't kidding. I'm not a health expert, but are you supposed to eat that after you work out, or is it just like a healthy alternative? Or
Healthy alternative.
well,
That's why I picked it because we always do these podcasts when I have like a weekend in store where I'm going to be a crazy person. Um, so just to tell you a little bit about my weekend, our friends host a cornhole tournament, and it's just a bunch of friends and neighbors playing cornhole, having drinks, eating, maybe playing drinking games after. It's not a serious cornhole tournament, but we dress up. And since this won't air until after, my husband and I are dressing up as he's dressing up as a Joe Exotic, and I'm gonna be a tiger, and it's gonna be great.
That sounds awesome. Um, are you super competitive at cornhole?
No, I'm terrible. Out of 48 people, I won 48th place 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's the level of competitiveness I'm at. Yeah, I'm terrible. I used to throw overhand just because I felt like got a little more air that way. I'm really, really not good. I have a cornhole like set at home. We never practice. Um, so it's gonna be good. We really focus on the outfits and the food and drinks as opposed to like the competition. It makes it go down a lot easier.
Yeah. It's all about the journey, right?
Guess so. Um, what? I don't recall. Like, do you want to give any our listeners any recommendations and resources for PIAs? Is there anything handy that comes to mind?
I mean, definitely the privacy program management book.
Yeah. I have this tabbed. This thing's great. Um, I reference it often. Yeah, and I think they do have example like what kinds of things you should ask for or you ask about in a privacy impact assessment. So I think that's a good call out.
Yeah, and if you do like a Google search, all right, there's a lot of companies that, not like companies and law firms that
Right.
have some good material. Um, and then if you're just, if you have some time on your hands, like just go and read the legal text. That always helps as
Hmm.
well. You and I are both familiar with OneTrust application, so they have
Yeah.
some pretty good out of the box templates there to set set a good foundation. And um, those are just some resources that come to mind. I tend to like stray away from not asking like Chat GPT, no offense, right? But I like to do kind of like to read and what do they call it? Like is it linear research or something? Where you read multiple different sources. Don't know why they would
Hmm.
like, I think my naming of it is wrong. Just, forgive me for anybody who's listening and I'm just
They're
destroying
like,
it.
that's not it. It
Yeah.
is circular. It's circular reading.
This guy's an idiot.
um, yeah. Uh, CIPM is good, but I think you touched on something. OneTrust, or I'm sure all of the other SaaS providers have the same thing. Out of the box templates, usually there's a team of people that have read through the law and have included like core elements. I love those. They are great starting points. So if I'm ever thinking, oh, we need an assessment for this, we should probably add questions for this new regulation that came out. I always look at see what the template has there because maybe I can just pull questions from there and it oftentimes has references to the law. So it'll say um CCPA or Virginia VCDPA, or it'll like denote which laws it came from, which I absolutely love. So yeah, I don't like reinventing the wheel. I don't think the wheel at this point in privacy, I don't think we should have to reinvent the wheel at all. Someone's already probably done it.
Yeah, I agree. And like, yeah, I'm sure there's like, if you have a team full of lawyers, they, they probably know what they're doing more so than myself, right? Um,
And this isn't legal advice. This is
yeah,
never legal advice. These are just tips. They're Derek and Amanda sharing their thoughts, but not a substitute for legal advice.
One day, like we know enough,
Yeah,
right? And I say that with a sense of humor.
yeah.
Uh,
I could play a lawyer on TV. Easy. No, we're
do
going
you
there
think
deep.
you think lawyers, like when I watch like TV shows about like legal stuff, take like the Lincoln Lawyer, for example, or Law and Order, right? Do you think real lawyers watch that and are like, that's not how it's done?
I don't know. Yeah. Maybe it is how it's done. I'm gonna pretend that the movies are like a depiction of reality. And reality is like a paralegal like going to the court. Like the lawyer doesn't even go to like these cases. They send their paralegal to litigation. All right. Well, before we get ourselves in trouble, um, thank you for listening.
Yeah. And if any listeners want to share some of your comments and insights about privacy assessments, if we made an error somewhere, feel free to call it out. Um, reach out anytime and happy to help. And thanks for listening.
All right. Have a good night.
See ya.